Hello, I'm Debbie Ingram. Welcome to the Under the Dome interview series. We're doing a special series on affordability in Vermont. And my guest today is Tim Ashe. Thank you so much, Tim, for being with us.
Great to be here, Debbie.
Well, Tim is now the Deputy State Auditor, and he was for many years a state senator and served also as the President Pro Tem of the Senate. So he is very knowledgeable about our subject for today, which is taxes. So let's just dive right in about what the Office of the Auditor does. But rather than make it kind of abstract, I wanted to ask you specifically about a report that just came out recently that examined the Blueprint for Health. Can you use that as an example to sort of walk us through the process of what the office does and the conclusions it reaches?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this question because I feel like many people have no concept of what the actual work behind the scenes is of the auditor's office before they see that headline in the news that the auditor finds this or that program is doing a good job or maybe a not so good job. To start with, our office has the ability to evaluate basically any dollar of state spending. And so if we decide that a program, a healthcare program that the state manages deserves some scrutiny to make sure that it's serving all the people it's supposed to serve, that the outcomes, meaning are people like better off as a result of the program, to make sure that it's fulfilling what people had expected of that program, we are empowered to demand information from the relative state agency with responsibility, and then a team of auditors take the information and sort of methodically march through before they reach conclusions about how that program is doing. And everything that appears in any of our audit reports is backed up by documentary evidence. So we don't produce audits and say, well, we kind of like this program, or we think that program is, we wouldn't do it if we were in the legislature or we were in the executive branch. We're saying we're looking objectively at whether it's doing what it's supposed to. And so while sometimes people don't like what they learn from our audits, they never question the facts as we present them. So Blueprint for Health is a program that's been around since about 2006. Governor Douglas was in office at the time. And in 2006, it's not that long ago, but from the healthcare landscape, it seems like light years ago. Back in 2006, many primary care offices, the places you generally just go to see the doctor for your annual checkup or a physician assistant or someone else, and then they might forward you on with a referral to a specialist. But those primary care practices, which are really the backbone of our healthcare system, many of them didn't have medical record systems, so-called health information technology, the kind of thing that made it easy for them to chronicle your own health situation and connect you to other elements of the healthcare system. Many of them did not have the in-house resources to do more than just check your knee and make sure your reflexes were still working and all those basics you remember from getting, like an annual physical. But as people's needs became more complicated and as we understood people's needs in a more sophisticated way, that their mental health was tied up in their physical health, that whether they had nutrition at home and whether they had peer supports, all those things that really explain whether someone has a good quality of life, many primary care practices weren't really set up for that. So this program, the Blueprint for Health, was meant to lift all of the primary care practices in Vermont up to a minimum standard. Once that had happened, the presumption was that people would be healthier, the people that are served, and that costs would go down, because if you meet people's needs up front, it means you can help avoid the expensive side, which is going to the hospital. So fast forward to about a year ago, our office had always heard about how positive the Blueprint program is, but of course the reputation of a program doesn't always mean that it's producing the results that people might associate with it. So our team set out to determine if and how Blueprint was measuring whether its efforts continue to make people any healthier and if it has any impact on reducing overall healthcare spending. I'll skip to the finish line, which is that we found that the Blueprint for Health isn't really even analyzing whether it's having any positive impact on people's health and well-being, and it hasn't really put in the effort to measure whether its efforts are helping bring down healthcare spending. It can tell you a lot about how it helps an individual primary care practice support one particular person with a set of challenges, all of which is good. But the state has only so much funding to go around, so it has to make decisions. How are we going to invest to make people better off and rein in healthcare spending? And right now, we can't really say if Blueprint is the right investment for those things. Doesn't mean the Blueprint program isn't a good program, but it means we don't know what its impact is right now. So that was really the conclusion of the report. That was a mouthful, but that was my start to finish.
Yes, no, I appreciate that, and actually, it is interesting because I know from being around in Montpelier for a while that yes, everybody looks at Blueprint in a very positive way. So
Yes.
so let's shift to something that is looked at in a much more negative way. So you said the thing that we viewed positively might actually have some more problems than we thought. Education, right? Our property tax is paying for education. That's on everybody's minds these days. So that's viewed not so positively. Has your office had occasion to kind of look and see what we're getting for the investment that we make in K through 12 education?
Well, about 4 years ago or so, our office conducted 2 audits. This was before my time as the deputy, both of which related to the relationship of our public K through 12 system with the so-called independent schools. These are, in many cases, long-standing, generally high schools like Linden Institute or St. Johnsbury Academy or Burton, which fall under a different set of rules than the typical public school does. Those were really trying to determine whether these independent schools, the extent to which they were subject to the same sets of standards as the public school system. So they didn't really get to the heart of your question. Our office has not done a formal audit on are we getting the right value for money in terms of school spending. That's a tough question to answer. And maybe just as a quick side note, our auditors they don't make judgmental decisions about whether something is worth doing or not. They say, here are the dollars that went into, let's say, special education services. Did the students receiving those services see improvement? So a very objective question. That's what we can answer through our audit process. We can't make the judgment about, well, property taxes are too high. Mm-hmm. That is for the public really to decide, and for the legislature and the governor and his team. But we have done some research on this question, and it really looks at the last 4 or 5 years, and this isn't something that's been in a report, but just as we've tried to monitor things. And what we can really see is a pretty significant shift that has occurred largely from the onset of COVID, where there has been a fairly dramatic increase in the total number of employees system-wide throughout the whole state who are not what you would think of as a conventional teacher, someone who's in a classroom all day as the first grade teacher or a math teacher or a science teacher. These are in what I'd call supplemental job titles, counselors, classroom assistants, a variety of things which each one of them might have a justification for it, but the growth of them in the last 4 or 5 years has been quite significant. At the same time, the number of actual classroom teachers, the ones we think of teaching curriculum, has been going down. So, like many things about our education system, it's an intricate, complicated web, and sometimes it feels almost paradoxical, the information we get, right? The number of students is going down, but the cost is going up. We hear that frequently. But also that personnel costs are going up considerably, which is true, while the number of teachers has been going down. And so that's the kind of information which we from time to time will add to the equation so people can then know what types of questions they want to ask about it.
So it seems like that would be identified as a driver of increases then, the personnel shift. Are there other factors that have driven up the costs?
Healthcare is the personnel costs in general are where the bulk of the education spending is. Healthcare and the significant increases in healthcare costs continue to be, I don't know if they're number two, but they're a big one. And in the last few years, they've been driving a good chunk of the property tax pressure people have seen. Right now, the teachers and all the other educational employees, for the most part, are covered in I don't want to get too wonky about healthcare. I know that we could do that offline and
right,
amuse ourselves to death about it, but basically it's a pool of people, many tens of thousands of people who are covered in the state, the teacher's health plan. The premiums for them have been going up, double digits, just like we've seen throughout the rest of Vermont's economy. And while the teachers themselves bear a portion of that, the school districts pick up roughly 80% of it. So as we've seen those increases in healthcare costs, that's been passed on to taxpayers, for sure.
And does the auditor's office only focus on how money is spent, or do you also have occasion to look at the equity or the fairness of and the common sense, I guess, effectiveness of taxes in general as well, the revenue side?
Well, I think we don't always set out to determine whether the spending or the revenue generation is being done in an equitable way, whether that's defined by progressivity or geographic. But sometimes our work lends itself to those very considerations. So actually, I'll give an example that relates to teachers' health care. It touches on these issues, I hope, somewhat directly, and it's not too far afield. We did a report 3 years ago about the state employees' health plan, which is analogous to the state teachers' health plan situation. Both of them are rising very fast. They now combined exceed $500 million a year being paid for by taxpayers. So these are not small sums of money. And we wanted to understand what could be done to try to rein in the costs without taking benefits away from the employees themselves or the teachers. And one of the strategies we observed some other states doing was basically saying, we're not going to just pay any price for the healthcare services we get moving forward out of our plan. We're going to pay a fair price. So basically negotiating a tougher deal on behalf of the members so that you could bring down the cost. That revealed some interesting things that speak to this broader equity question. As you know, not every healthcare provider gets paid the same amount of money for the same service. So if someone goes to get some routine check, every hospital is both charging a different amount and getting paid a different amount by whoever it is that's paying the bill. That produces a lot of eccentric equity issues around whether some people who might have to pay out of pocket for certain things are getting overcharged compared to their peers who are in a lower cost hospital area. It means that the state might be shipping more money out of its plan, or the teachers might be shipping more money out of their plan to one hospital area versus another, all of which have spillover effects which really cause real problems. A hospital might have to make cuts as a result of not being in a more generous situation. But overall, we're often asked to do some research to support the work others are doing. But even some of these questions like equity become sometimes hard for an auditor's office to say, well, tell us what you specifically mean when you say equity, so then we can answer the question of whether that test has been met.
Great. Well, thank you. That's just very, very helpful for us to understand the overview of how this works. But since we're doing a series on affordability, I would like to kind of put you in the hot seat and ask you, what is your definition of affordability?
Well, I'm going to take off my deputy auditor hat here and put on citizen Tim and maybe former legislator Tim, and I think you'd probably agree that one of the hardest things is to define affordability, because to each person it probably means a different thing. I could rattle off statistics about the percentage of income someone should pay for their housing to be considered affordable, or what the livable wage is compared to the expenses that a normal household is experiencing. And yet I suspect that if we talk to the people, to many people, even if they met those ratios or percentages, they would tell you they feel like it's not affordable. And so to me, I might have a slightly more philosophical view of what affordability is, which is accomplishing all the things, I'm thinking more maybe on the collective sense here, accomplishing all of the programmatic and policy goals that we as a community have decided we want at the very best price. Because how you factor in things like how much money you spend on healthcare is tied up in how much the state spends on healthcare. How much you spend on housing is tied to many other things. At the end of it, the question is, do people feel like for the price they're paying, they're getting value in all of the core things that they need in their life, whether it's shelter, whether it's healthcare, whether it's food, and so on, and a little bit of, security, economic security as well on top of that. And the more people who feel that, you can experience it in the community. People have a bounce in their step. You can feel it in the community that it's good times. And I think with the most recent election, we realized that this broader anxiety and concern with affordability, which had been bubbling and it's always been there, but had reached a point that was a little bit more of a saturation point than it had been in previous elections. And so that tells me that we've tipped past that collective sense of what affordable is. The problem, of course, now is what do you do? And I've often thought, as someone who chaired the Finance Committee in the Senate, where you don't go to make friends because every day you're talking about taxes. It's you have to have thick skin some days. I was getting trolled by social media people. It was not always pleasant. But what government does has progressivity or not on how it raises money, but also how it spends money. And so there are some who see how much is being spent on public education in Vermont and say, we have to cut that. But then when they hear that it might cut the school in their community, they say, well, no, but not us. We're exceptional. We're the ones who have been doing everything right. It's everyone else that's the problem. And so to make the changes to lower the cost in a pursuit of affordability, you run the risk of being very regressive on how money is spent. And that the relationship of those two things, I think, is often underappreciated. So the challenges are immense, but that's how I view it. I wish that it was as simple as saying anyone who makes this amount of money and the housing prices can't be more than this and that, but I don't believe that would fully capture affordability in the sense that it matters the most, which is people's comfort level, feeling of economic security, and belief that the combination of private and public payment in support of the things they need and want the most seems fair.
Well, that makes sense, and I really appreciate your taking the time, and a lot of the things you've said have been very thoughtful and very helpful for us to understand this concept of affordability, and especially around our taxes. So thanks very much for joining me.
If I've dropped even like a smidge in there to help the collective thinking about these really, really challenging issues, then I'll be pleased that we were able to have this chat.
Yes, definitely. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.